Hello, I'm Peter Hund. I'm Division Chief of Operations. Today, we want to discuss one of the more important policies we have with the department, and that is the investigator call out. I'm joined today by Chief Dorita, the fire marshal, and we're going to go over a couple of important aspects to calling out the fire investigator.
Thanks for having me, Chief.
Anytime.
It's a very important factor what we do when we need to have a fire investigator to the scene. It's been asked a lot of questions lately when we have a policy that clearly spells it out in FRB 101, and it's a good guideline. It lists the requirements of when to call out a fire investigator. So I'll run down the list with you in a couple questions that have been asked of me lately, and I'll try to see if we can answer those as well. One of the first times is evidence that any fire is crime-related or foul play is suspected. So if the incident commander or the company officer, after they've or during their fire suppression activities, notices what looks to be criminal activity, has a suspicion, has the report from a bystander, somebody left hurriedly from the scene or was seen with pouring gasoline on the fire, some of the obvious signs, incendiary devices, explosive devices, fire bombs, maybe there's a stolen vehicle involved, burglary, we see forced entry, doors are smashed open. Those are when you want to call the fire investigator. All of our fire investigators are deputized to Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department, and they're able to make arrests. They're allowed to follow up on criminal activity, pursue the case, and bring it to fruition. Another spelled out in our policy is the loss of life or significant injury. It specifically states any fire explosion incident or event resulting in the loss of life, any fire explosion related injury or burns where the injured party is transported to a medical health facility by fire rescue. The injury or burn shall be related to a fire or explosion, and it shall require that advanced life support measures or treatment were taken. So if someone received burns in a fire, we recently had fire on a patio over the weekend, and one of the victims, it was a plastic plant. They went to move it, and they got second-degree burns on their hands, and they were transported to the hospital by fire rescue. You need to call the fire investigator. If someone is burned, significant burns as a result of a fire, they were trapped, that warrants a fire investigator. If someone was using an explosive device and the device detonated and caused injury, that would require the call out from a fire investigator. We had a question recently. We had a child that got a pot. The parents reported that the child grabbed the pot off the stove. It had boiling water in it, and it scalded the child and created second-degree burns on the child. And was transported. It was reported as an accident, but if there's suspicion involved, it could have maybe not been accidental. Your safest bet in that instance, because there was a burn, call the fire investigator and let them make the determination if they're going to do a follow-up to the hospital. Firefighter loss of life or injury. Anytime there's a line of duty death, the fire investigators to be notified. There's a whole new procedure and a PPM that involves that for the line of duty death and reporting of that. And the incident commander, in part of that call out procedure, is notifying the fire investigator, because their job is going to be a lot, and you're going to get more than one investigator in those instances, Chief. A lot of times it's going to be overwhelming. The scene, it can be chaotic, so we're going to have multiple fire investigators on a line of duty death or injury come out, and they're going to confiscate gear and sequester that. We're going to take pictures, we're going to document, we're going to assist in the determination and the cause. We're going to work with our health and safety people that are coming from other divisions and trying to get a handle on that scene, but definitely that's a call for the investigator. There's accidental fires. If there's substantial monetary loss or structural damage, we spell that out in the policy, Chief. It says that anything, fire loss exceeding $70,000 or structural damage exceeding 20%. A lot of question comes, how do we determine the percentage of the structure? The best rule of thumb for this, and we're not, if it ended up only being 18%, nobody's going to get in trouble for calling the fire investigator because they were a couple percentage points off in size. But the best way is square off the structure as best as you can. and divide that into 4s, and that gives you a better determination. That'll get you your 25% marks, and then rule of thumb it. No one's looking for that precise determination, but we came up with anything exceeding 20% usually has a dollar value that determines into that $70,000 range. We also have any crime-related or foul play suspected in the incident requires a fire investigator response regardless of the dollar value. So if there was a fire that you had and it only had maybe $10,000 in damage to the kitchen, but you suspected that it was arson, you have to call the fire investigator. So there's policy that needs to be read here because there are exceptions to every rule that we have. Juvenile related incidents. Anytime any fire or explosion incident where a person under the age of 18 has a direct involvement in the ignition shall require a fire investigator. So if there's a child and the child was playing with a lighter and they lit their clothes on fire and you put out a small closet fire or something worse, but it involved that juvenile having a direct action to the start of that fire, that fire investigator needs to be called. We have intervention programs that the fire investigators are trained to do their origin and cause determination, and then work with the parents or the guardian to get that child into an intervention. Sometimes they go awry and the child may be older. This may not be the first time they've done it, and more serious action is taken, but the investigators are trained to make sure that that child doesn't get lost into the system. So that's why it's pertinent that you call the fire investigator. Explosive devices or an explosion. Anytime that also circumvents the $70,000 amount or the 20%. If there's a fire involving an explosion or an explosive device is found, the fire investigator needs to be called. The investigators out of the Community Risk Reduction Division work hand in hand with the Sheriff's Bomb Squad, just like Special Ops does. Our investigators are assigned with the detectives that are the bomb specialists, and we work with them on explosive devices, and all of our investigators are certified fire and explosion investigators, so they're trained to determine cause and origin for that as well. Then there's the catch-all category, which makes it real easy for somebody. All other circumstances. A fire investigator shall be requested in any fire explosion incident or event in which a fire cause cannot be determined by the fire rescue unit. So if you've got a car on the side of the road, maybe it's a very expensive car, it's one that's in the $100,000 range. We have a Rolls Royce burn up in the parking lot, but a determination can't be made, call the fire investigator. Nobody's going to get in trouble for having dispatch call the on-call fire investigator and saying, please contact the incident commander or the company officer on a landline. We're available 24/7 to have questions asked and make sure you make the right decision and get the report. If they have a question with the report, call the fire investigator and we'll work them through that. Also, if a sprinkler and suppression system are activated right now, and we're working on changing that a little bit, but for right now, anytime a sprinkler head is activated or the fire suppression system is dumped, let's say at a restaurant, the on-call fire investigator should be notified. You may request through dispatch to notify an investigator. They will and are required to contact the requester back. That doesn't mean the investigator is going to come. The investigator is going to make the determination based on the information given over the phone or radio, whichever communication means they use, to determine with the company officer whether they're going to respond or not. So there shouldn't be any worry from the company officer, the incident commander, if they call the investigator. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. That last catch-all is really the comfort that we're trying to provide the company officer. If they don't know, call. There's no problem calling the fire investigator, and they'll let you know if they're coming.
And I know, Chief, from conversations we had, one thing that the crews may not be aware of, but that's securing the scene and the fact that a fire rescue employee must remain on scene until the investigator gets there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's an excellent point. The laws have changed. Laws are constantly evolving and things have changed. We used to just be under the assumption that as long as somebody held the scene of authority, meaning a fire rescue unit or a police officer, sheriff's department, law enforcement basically could hold the scene. That's been basically overturned in court. And what the court is saying and what we are requiring operations to do is when the investigator is notified and they say that they notify the company officer that they're coming out to the scene, fire rescue must remain on scene until they are face to face with the fire investigator, and then they turn the scene over officially to the investigator. If we don't do that, and we, let's say, let a police officer do it, we lose the continuity of the scene. We'll lose, if it was an arson case, we'll lose our arson case. And that's a big deal for us. We have a higher than national average on arrests, and we want to maintain that because of the due diligence that we do, and that's part of it. Scene security and maintaining and preserving that scene is of utmost importance.
And I know, we have quite a few new officers out there, and I know one issue that I have seen come across my desk a lot of times is calls that aren't really structure fires or dispatch fires, more medical calls, but they do meet the criteria of this policy, and sometimes those slip through the cracks. So, I'm glad you were here to kind of go over this policy for our new officers, and I would ask, that all our officers just keep this policy in mind on any call, any type of incident, because there may be a need for a fire investigator to be contacted. So I appreciate your time today, Chief. Thanks for coming out and
Appreciate you having us.
helping spread this information.
Absolutely. And if we can leave them with one thing, if anybody has any questions after seeing this, discussion between you and I, that new email address that we created is for the crews. That's first and foremost, the fire-marshal@pbcgov.org. Send us a question. We'll respond back to you with the appropriate answer. If you don't ask, we won't know that you had that concern or need, and you shouldn't have that question lingering out there. There's an answer for every question, so just email us and we'll get back to you. So thanks again for having us.
No problem. Thanks, Chief. That concludes our talk. Thank you, everyone.